Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES to save 10% on all orders over $10. Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends. We got another big day of Throne of Eldraine previews to go over. And if you're curious as to the sources of any of these preview cards, which content creator previewed which one, just check out the description below. All the information is down there. Also, if you're looking to pick up Throne of Eldraine products, they do have pre-orders on FlipsideGaming.com. And if you use that Heroes promo code, you can save a little cash and support the channel at the same time. That's always appreciated, but without any further ado, let's get into it. We'll begin this video, as we did many of the other ones, by looking at variations on cards that we did not previously see. So all 5 of these cards we talked about in the last couple preview videos, so if you want to hear my thoughts on them, check out those videos in the playlist. But we did not see the extended art or the showcase copies of these particular cards. Here's what they look like. Folio Fancies, Vantress Gargoyle, Bone Crusher Giant, Fires of Invention, and Dance of the Mans. This one is a French language preview card. On the left side, you see the translation Arcana of Absolution. So this is something that in limited games, you're going to be very happy to play, even if your opponent isn't on white. I mean, bonus points if they are. But a 3/2 flyer for 4. Not the most amazing stats, but not bad. Sometimes you need a creature with evasion. Now, this one has more than that. Not only does it have protection from white, but also creatures can attack you or planeswalkers you control unless their controller pays 1 for each of those creatures. That can be kind of a rough ability for an opponent to deal with in Draft or Sealed because those games tend to be pretty creature heavy. So for them to attack in, they might have to hold off on playing spells or vice versa, and that's only going to work out to your advantage. This is a very main deckable card. If you're not main decking it for some reason though, and your opponent happens to be on white, go ahead and side it in. This could maybe even see a little bit of standard play out of sideboards if mono white aggro decks that are going wide are popular. This would be a great card to bring in to slow them down, and also it has the protection. Commander Pillow 4 players, here's another card that you might enjoy throwing in a deck too. Ardenvale Paladin, this is a pretty good limited common. Here's what I like about it. When you look at just the stats alone, a 2/5 for 4, that is slightly ahead of curve than you see many times in Draft or Sealed. Sometimes you play 2 4s for 4 and you're okay with that. So going a little bit higher in the toughness means this maybe could attack in a little bit later into the game. It could protect you a little bit later into the game. I kind of like the economy there, but there's more to it than just that. This is also a knight, so it will work with knight synergies. And if you pay at least 3 white when you cast the spell, it comes in with a +1/+1 counter, actually becoming 3/6. That's fantastic economy. If you're in a mostly white deck or playing with knight synergies, this is a great card to include. But even if you're not, definitely could make your cut a good percentage of the time. And if for some reason you're not playing it in your main, bring it out of the sideboard if you need a bigger blocker. Linden, the Steadfast Queen. Okay, here's a very cool white devotion card at rare that you'll be happy to play in Draft or Seal for sure, as long as you're playing enough white. Obviously, you need to swing the 3 white to cast this card. And then secondly, the ability here, Vigilance 3/3, I mean, that's good for 3 mana. Whenever a white creature you control attacks, you gain 1 life. That's really what you want to be doing with this card. Attacking in with a lot of white creatures, shifting the balance of the game to gain life as hopefully damage is getting across to your opponent. This could actually be good in Standard too. Imagine this. If I'm playing a life gain strategy, turn 1 Healer Hawk, turn 2 Johnny's Pridemate, turn 3 this, later on Unbreakable Formation, maybe even a Johnny Strength of the Pride. Feels like it could be a deck in this next Standard season. Definitely something to consider and maybe test a little bit. Commander life gain strategies could appreciate this depending on the deck build. And also go wide strategies that are mostly white could be happy with this card too. You could build around this as well. It's a legendary creature, but it would probably be a little more on par for power level and brawl than Commander. Lonesome Unicorn on the left, you see the regular copy. On the right is the showcase copy, although the border was cut off there. Okay, so this card is not amazing for limited. I'm going to just start off there. It could see play, though, from time to time in your deck. If I have cards that interact with adventures and or cards that interact with knights, I might be interested. Now, the Lonesome Unicorn isn't a knight, but the adventure does give you a knight. Rider in Need is a sorcery. Create a 2/2 white knight creature token with vigilance. So you gotta look at it this way. It's almost like you're getting 5/5 power toughness on the battlefield with vigilance, but you're paying 2 white and 6 on an installment plan, granted, if you want to. But still, that doesn't feel good enough in a vacuum most of the time, unless I'm really desperate for board presence. Maybe in some seal pools, you're going to look at this and say, okay, good enough, get in there. But you're not going to be thrilled to play it unless, like I said, you do have other cards that synergize with adventures or knights. Rally for the Throne. Here's another card I would play in draft or sealed occasionally, maybe not all the time again. Kind of feels a little bit like Raise the Alarm, but it's going to cost you a white and 2. It is an instant, so you can use this as a combat trick. Your opponent attacks in, surprise, surprise, they have 2 more 1/1s you didn't know about. So that sometimes is good enough, especially in sealed maybe. But the second half of the card's kind of interesting too. If at least 3 white mana was spent to cast the spell, you gain 1 life for each creature you control. So you get some life gain built in there too. And usually when you play draft or sealed, you're going to have a fair amount of creatures on the battlefield unless you're really far behind. And this also creates 2 creatures when it comes in as well, so you know you're going to be gaining 2 life off of it. Kind of makes the casting cost feel a little bit better then. So yeah, if I'm in a mostly white deck, I could be interested in this for draft. Sealed, even if I don't think I'm always going to be able to put 3 white mana into this casting cost, might still make my cut some of the time as a combat trick. Or maybe you just need some sacrifice fodder. There are cards that are looking for that. Or some cards we've seen over the last couple of weeks actually care if you have 1/1 creatures in play. So if those synergies exist in your pool, then the card gets a little bit better. Won't always make your cut though. Don't really feel this one for standard. Commander, you could throw this in a life game build where you're going wide, I suppose. Some decks might appreciate this, but definitely will feel a little more powerful in Brawl. Silver Flame Squire. This is an alright limited card. You'll play this sometimes you won't. Here's what I like about it. The adventure side, again, could interact with other cards that care about adventures, but it's actually a pretty good combat trick on its own. White and 2, target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn, untap it. I like combat tricks that buff and untap. They can really surprise the opponent sometimes. Or you get to use this as quasi-vigilance on a creature in combat, not only buffing it, but also untapping it, so you can use it as a defender next turn. If you do use that instant adventure, then later on you can go ahead and pay 2 for a 2/1 creature as well. So you get a little board presence. Nothing crazy there, but it is something on the battlefield. Sir Ellen, the Lion's Claw. Okay, this is a very sweet card for draft or sealed. 2 white and 3. Other than the double white, nothing that really pushes you towards color devotion, which is kind of nice. Legendary creature, human knight, so it is a knight. 4/4 first strike, wow, okay. When this attacks, other creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. That's crazy. This is an uncommon, mind you, not even a rare. You're going to see this show up actually a fair amount when you play draft or sealed. Okay, so first off, tons of durability here. When it does attack, it's going to be hard to kill going in as a 4/4 first striker. It's got a lot of first strike power. It's got a lot of toughness too. And pumping your team, that could get you past a board stall, sometimes close out a game if you're going wide enough. And even if you're behind and you're not very wide at the time and you're just trying to stay alive, putting out a 4/4 first strike blocker sure isn't a bad thing. Standard though, I'm a tad bit skeptical. It could get there maybe in a knight deck as being part of the higher end of the curve. But here's my issue with it. 5 is a little expensive, and it's legendary, so you can't stack the ability like Benalish Marshal. So I'd at least test it out in standard, see how it plays. I'm not 100% sold on it though. Limited, however, the thing is a powerhouse. Overwhelmed Apprentice. This is a pretty sweet card. Let's talk limited first. It's just a 1/2 for 1. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. So it mills 2, then you get to scry 2. So in Dimir colors, there's a chance in limited that you might actually care about milling your opponent, and in some cases milling yourself as well. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. Now, if this was a 1-drop 1/2 that just said scry 2, I think that would be good enough to play. Being able to smooth out those early draws could be very good for you in draft or sealed. Now, milling your opponent sometimes will have payoff, sometimes it won't. And if it does, wonderful. If it doesn't, this is still definitely worth playing. However, your opponent might be on a self-mill plan, and you could be helping them if you're not careful. So if that happens, then of course just side it out for game 2 or game 3. This actually could see standard play. We're going to look at a card a little bit later called Drown in the Loch. This would play very good in a standard deck with that one. And also I'm sure we're going to see other payoffs for milling the opponent as we go through the rest of this set. Black Lance Paragon. Okay, this one is also a rare. This is a 3/1 with flash for just a black and 1. I like that surprise element. It's also a knight, so yep, yet again, a card that's going to play well in draft or sealed with knight synergies. Also, when it does enter the battlefield, target knight can gain death touch and lifelink until end of turn, and that could include this if that's the only target you have or the best target you have. Ultimately, if I have a knight strategy going on, I'm definitely playing this in draft or sealed if I can. If I don't have a knight strategy going on, surprise, death touch, lifelink for 2 doesn't feel that bad either. I would still play this probably in a vacuum and be pretty happy with it. Not necessarily feeling this one for standard knights, but I think it's worth testing out. The Cauldron of Eternity. Okay, this one is a mythic, and there's a lot happening here, so let's take it all in first. 2 black and 10. Wow, legendary artifact. However, the spell does cost 2 less to cast for each creature card in your graveyard. Whenever a creature you control dies, put it on the bottom of its owner's library. So that's important. Keep that in mind because this next part says, black and 2 tap, pay 2 life. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Activate this ability only anytime you can cast a sorcery. Okay. So the reason that second part is in there so you can't juggle things very easily. You really want to mill yourself if you're going to play this card. Let's talk standard first. Does it see play? I think it could. Last season, we did have a serviceable reanimation deck in the format. This, along with some other cards we're getting in the set, could push the reanimation strategy further. Might even get pushed even further with Theros because we're going to focus on the underworld in that set. So if this doesn't see a ton of play right now, maybe in the future it will. With that being said, though, I do think it's very possible that this sees standard play this season because as long as there's enough ways to mill yourself, and maybe the deck goes a little more into a black direction, a little less Rakdos, still a lot of good reanimation targets out there in black, could be a thing that you see at the tables. So definitely worth testing. Sounds like a fun build if you can make it happen. Limited, do you actually play this card in Draft or Sealed? I think you could. It depends on your deck. Black and blue do care about milling yourself as well as your opponent to some degree. So in a draft, maybe you can take advantage of that. Find some ways to mill yourself. This card does get a little bit better. Reanimate something ahead of curve and steal a game here or there. The other way to look at it, though, is simply a value card in the late game. Maybe I don't have a lot of great tricks with this, but perhaps in the later portion of the game, when I'm starting to run out of gas, I go ahead and play this, and as long as I have enough life to activate it at that point, I can start to bring my best creatures back to the battlefield from the graveyard that have died throughout the course of the game, and hopefully I just get past that board stall and pull ahead. If you're up against an aggressive build in game 1, you might not get to that point in the game, so be prepared to sideboard it out, but I do think it could be an okay card. Again, just adjust expectations. It will be better in some builds than others. When it comes to the singleton formats, this could be powerful in Brawl. You might be able to build some kind of reanimation deck there. Commander, it might be good in some builds there too, just as simply another way to reanimate. Cauldron's Gift. Okay, another card that could show up in standard reanimation. It's another one of these 5 casting cost reanimation sorceries, right? You may choose a creature card from your graveyard. If you do, return it to the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it, though. Okay. And it has Adamant. If at least 3 black mana was spent to cast this spell, put the top 4 cards of your library into the graveyard. So it self-mills too. If you use that Adamant, you can self-mill, and you can, at that point, either put something back from the graveyard to the battlefield that either got milled, or something that was already there, depending on which was better. The reason I think this particular spell could see play in reanimation and standard compared to some of the others is because it gives you the flexibility to also mill yourself. Now, for limited purposes, like I mentioned, there are reasons that you might want to mill yourself, especially if you're in Dimir colors within this format. So this plays into that strategy if that's the direction you're going into. But also, you might be able to reanimate something and actually steal a game here or there, kind of like I mentioned with the previous card too. Regardless, though, even if you don't have any crazy tricks with this could just be late game heat again. Maybe you just need your best creature that died earlier in the game to come back. Wonderful, here's a way to bring it back. Maybe tip those scales. And kind of the same story again with the singleton formats. I'm sure there's going to be a Brawl reanimation deck out there. And in Commander, it could be a decent redundancy for you in some decks. Forever Young. Okay, so this is a common and a cantrip, so I always like that. 2 casting costs is cheap, but it is a sorcery. Put any number of target creature cards from your graveyard on top of your library. Okay, so with the cantrip, basically you get to stack your deck based on the creatures in your graveyard. And you even get to draw one right away, which is kind of nice. I think this can be a decent limited card. Sure, if you start to mill yourself a little too aggressively and you need to get some of those creatures back, maybe you're in those Dimir colors, this will be nice. But also, again, just in the late game when you need heat, you want to make sure you're drawing spells and not lands. This is a good way to kind of stack the deck and make that happen after you've already put some creatures in the graveyard. Standard, I think this might see standard play. I might try it in like a mid-range build for a similar reason, just make sure I don't run out of gas. I get some creatures in the graveyard, maybe I self-milled a little bit. Maybe they just died earlier in the game to a board sweep or something like that. I need to make sure I'm hitting stuff that's going to help the board state. This is a cheap way to do it. Torbrand, Thane of Redfell. This one is a rare. You're not going to see it as much in Draft or Seal, but let's talk about limited first. You do really want to be pretty devoted to red to play this card. It's got 3 red in the casting cost, and if a red source you control would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage plus 2 instead. It also has decent size behind it and a little defense. It's a 2/4 for 4. But remember, it feels more like a 4/4 because of that ability. It will be best in draft where you can draft a lot of red cards, but as long as you can swing the 3 red and the casting cost, it will be good in sealed too. I do think this one could see standard play, maybe on the higher end of a red aggro deck. Could you imagine putting this out on turn 4? And from that point forward, all those red sources of damage, and that includes creatures, instants, sorceries, whatever, that could help you close out a game pretty quickly. Imagine this with Cavalcade of Calamity, for example. That could be really sweet. So yeah, I have no doubt we're going to be seeing this one in standard. Commander, there's a lot of cool combos you could do with this thing. Things like Insult, Injury, and Grape Shot. Traditionally, aggressive commander decks haven't been all that good, but they did give us a lot of new tools recently with Merciless Rage, and this is continuing that trend. So maybe they get better. As long as all the pieces are there, though, this might be a better commander in Brawl. Garen Briggs Squire, this is a bear with upside. Sometimes you just need those creatures at the 2 spot to build out your board presence early in the game. And a vanilla 2/2 for 2, not thrilling, but sometimes good enough. This one takes it a step further by caring about adventures. Whenever you cast a spell that has an adventure, this will get +1/+1 until end of turn. So granted, the utilization there could be a little hit or miss depending on timing, but even with a few adventures in my deck, I would be very happy to play this in draft or sealed. Tuin Vale, Tree Folk. Okay, this is another good limited card. Again, it's an adventure, so you're going to have reasons to play those outside of just the fact that adventures seem pretty good. This adventure is a sorcery called Oaken Boon, a green and 3, put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. That's not bad to buff something out, maybe something with First Strike perhaps. Then later on for a green and 5, you get a 6/5 creature. Yeah, sure, it doesn't have trample, doesn't have evasion, but it is pretty big, and I feel like that's sizable enough for me to care in draft or sealed. With the 2 pieces of the card together, I feel like it's extremely playable, actually. It might not always make your cut, especially considering the creature casting cost is on the higher end, you just might have better things. But if you have to play this, I don't think you'll be sad about it. This one comes to us from a Spanish language preview, and it's Yorvo, Lord of the Garen Preserve. This is another card that really cares about devotion, this time devotion to green. So it's a rare, you're not going to see it all the time in draft or sealed, but it's a pretty good card. You'll be happy to play it when you can. It is 3 on color for the 3 green, and it interacts with green creatures entering the battlefield. Whenever another green creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on this. Then if Yorvo's power is greater than the creature's power, put another +1/+1 counter on it. Starts off with 4 +1/+1 counters when it enters the battlefield. So it is pretty sizable, a 4/4 for 3 to begin with, and it can grow very quickly. Also note, it does say whenever another green creature enters the battlefield, so that could include tokens. So for limited, maybe another card that's better in draft than sealed, because if you're lucky enough to get this, perhaps you could draft around it a little bit, try to get a lot of smaller green creatures, and just let this thing go crazy. Some sealed pools might be able to support it, but of course, be careful. You don't want this thing to be stuck in your hand either. Standard, could this see play in a green stompy deck? I'll tell you, I want to test it, but I'm not completely sold. Here's my issue with it. Sure, it can come out pretty quickly. Sure, it can grow pretty quickly. But I feel like this could get chumped a lot. It doesn't have trample. It doesn't have evasion. And if the opponent can chump it a few times until they can hit a removal spell, I don't know how much it's really going to do. So like I said, I would want to still test it. Maybe there's ways to mitigate that risk. And of course, we still have a lot more of the set to see. Maybe the missing piece is yet to come. Drown in the Loch. Here's a payoff card maybe for mill, but I think it's pretty good on its own too. Check this out. Black-blue instant speed, choose one. Counter target spell with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard. Or destroy target creature with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard. So it can either be a destroy spell or a counter spell. Only cost 2, granted 2 different colors, but only 2. And early in the game, it might not be thrilling unless you have some way to mill your opponent early on. And maybe there will be a standard deck that can do that efficiently. If not, though, this card actually just gets good as you play Magic. Like later in the game, especially if I have a control build, you know those decks are going to try to drag out the game, right? Things are going to end up in my opponent's graveyard. Later in the game, this is a fantastic high economy spell. Yeah, I do think this does see standard play. I do think it actually has maybe even some modern potential in the right build. Now in limited, I think it's good there too for the same reasons. Maybe early on it's not doing a lot for you, but it scales nicely with the game, and later in the game this should be very useful. This one's a Chinese simplified language preview, loosely translated Wallbreaker Giant. This is another one of those 4 hybrid spells, this time in Gruul colors. It's a giant, 5/5. It can't be blocked by Walls and Knights. So for limited, this is actually a pretty good card. I like the economy, forecasting cost, you get a 5/5, and the bonus of being able to not worry about being blocked by walls, sure, but maybe more importantly in this set, knights. There's going to be a lot of knights out there, and just having that little advantage pushes this card just a bit more. For draft or sealed, as long as you can swing the casting cost, which is a little more forgiving being hybrid, yeah, I would definitely consider playing this in most builds. Standard, I guess it has a chance out of sideboards. I could see if the Knights deck actually became very good in this next meta or future meta, then mono red, mono green, or Gruul even could take this out of the sideboard for just a little bit of an advantage. Sorcerer's Broom, this one's actually pretty sweet too. It's a 2/1 for 2 artifact creature. We've talked earlier how sometimes artifacts will matter in this set, especially with blue. But aside from that, this will play very well with food strategies, because those strategies want to sacrifice food tokens, and they're going to give you plenty of opportunities as the game goes on to continually sacrifice. And as long as you have the mana to put into this, when you do make those sacrifices, you're building out your board state too with small creatures. There's also other cards in the set that allow you to sacrifice things outside of the food strategy, so keep your eyes open for those as well. When it comes to the singleton formats, Brawl, Commander, this could be good there too. Note that this is a spirit, so it plays well with Kaikar. Also, if you had some kind of sacrifice, aristocrat-style strategy, this could fit in there too. And in Commander especially, there's a lot of cards that could combo with this. Imagine playing this with Mana Echoes and Ashnod's Altar, for example. That could be fun. Plenty of other things you could do too, I'm sure. Alright, those are the preview cards for today. Tomorrow, we will be back and we're going to look at everything that comes out over the next 24 hours. So until next time, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible through the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page, as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.